The cool autumn wind brought the smell of falling leaves and a feeling of worry as it blew through the old auction yard behind the big grain tower in Pinebrook. Sarah Miller fixed her old cowboy hat and looked at her watch. It was 2:30 p.m., almost time for the animals to be sold at the estate auction. She had driven 3 hours from her small farm in Maple Hollow, not because she needed more horses, but because something in the newspaper ad had caught her eye. The ad said, "Estate sale includes 3 registered quarter horses, some farm tools, and household items." The ad was so short that it made her uneasy. Most estate sales with purebred horses gave lots of details, like their family history, ages, and training. This ad said almost nothing, which usually meant one of 2 things. Either the horses were so special that the auctioneers wanted to make people curious, or the horses were in such bad shape that honest details would scare buyers away. Sarah had learned to trust her gut after 30 years of working with horses, and her gut was telling her something was wrong. The old Pinebrook farm had once been the pride of the county. Mr. Walter Pinebrook had started it in the 1950s, turning 800 acres of rough land into a top quarter-horse breeding farm. His horses had won prizes. His training was famous in 3 states, and his yearly sales brought buyers from as far away as Oklahoma. But Mr. Pinebrook had died 6 months ago, and his only family, a nephew from New York named Brian Pinebrook, had come just once to see what he had inherited. What he found was a farm falling apart, bills stacked high, and 3 horses left from what used to be a great program. "Just sell everything," Brian told the local auctioneer, Mark Jensen. "I want this place empty and ready for new buildings by Christmas." Mark tried to explain that the horses deserved better than a regular auction, that horse people cared about bloodlines and would pay good money for the right animals. But Brian didn't care about feelings or tradition. He was a computer programmer who saw the farm as 800 acres of valuable land, not a family treasure. "They're just horses," he said, like someone who never understood that some bonds are more than just owning something. Sell them to whoever pays the most. So Mark did what he was told, putting out only a simple ad and adding the horses to the general estate sale instead of telling real horse people about them. It was legal. It was what the owner wanted, and it made sure the horses would sell fast to anyone with cash. What Mark didn't expect was the kind of buyers a regular auction would bring. Sarah got to the sale an hour early to look at the horses before the bidding started. What she saw behind the grain tower made her angry and sad. 3 horses stood in small, weak pens that wouldn't even be good enough for goats, let alone big horses. They had no shelter from the wind, no soft bedding, and their water buckets looked empty. The horses themselves told a sad story. The stallion was a bay with the strong, quick build of a quarter horse, or he would have been if he hadn't become so skinny. His ribs stuck out, his hip bones looked sharp, and his once strong neck was so thin that his head looked too big for his body. Fresh cuts on his legs and shoulders showed he had been fighting the weak fences, probably trying to escape. The mare was even worse, a reddish-brown horse with white spots that might have been pretty when she was healthy. Now she stood with her head almost touching the ground, too tired to care about anything. Her coat was dirty and tangled, and her eyes looked empty, like she had given up. But it was the 3rd horse that broke Sarah's heart. He was a young gelding, maybe 3 or 4 years old, with a smart face and bright eyes that showed he came from good horses. He should have been full of life, but instead he was lying flat in the mud, breathing fast and shallow, barely hanging on. "Excuse me," Sarah called to one of the auction workers, setting up equipment nearby. "How long have these horses been like this?" The man looked at the horses with the bored look of someone who saw animals as things, not living creatures. "Since yesterday morning. Boss says they came from some fancy farm that went broke. Yesterday morning, Sarah's voice got louder, even though she tried to stay calm. "They've been out here for over 24 hours with no food or water. Look, lady, I just set up the pens and move the animals. If you have questions, talk to Mark." Sarah found Mark Jensen near the auctioneer's stand, looking over his notes. She had known him for years. He had sold some of her extra horses before, and she always thought he was honest and good at his job. But today, something about him seemed off, like he was doing something he didn't feel right about. "Mark, what happened to those horses?" His face got tight, like someone who knew he was doing something wrong, but had to finish the job. "Sarah, I'm running the sale the way the owner told me to. Did the owner tell you to starve them?" "They came to us already in bad shape. The farm was a mess for months before Mr. Pinebrook died. We're only responsible for basic safety." Sarah looked at his face, seeing the struggle between his job and his morals. Mark was a good man in a tough spot, but that didn't change what was happening to the horses. "Who else wants them?" "I can't say who's bidding, but there's a lot of interest from out-of-state buyers." The way he said out-of-state buyers made Sarah's blood run cold. She had heard stories about people who went to auctions looking for cheap horses, not for riding or breeding, but for reasons no real horse person wanted to think about. "Mark, you know what kind of buyers I mean." His silence was all the answer she needed. The animal sale started at 3 p.m. with cows, pigs, and farm tools. Sarah sat in a metal folding chair, watching the crowd and trying to spot anyone who might be a danger to her plan. The real horse people were easy to see, ranchers and trainers she knew from other sales, people who understood good horses and usually fought hard to buy them. But today, they seemed quiet and worried, upset by how the horses looked and unsure if they could even survive a trip to a new home. It was the strangers who made her nervous. 3 men in cheap suits had come in a big trailer that could carry a dozen horses. They sat away from the locals, talking quietly and writing in notebooks like they planned to buy a lot of horses. Their leader, a thin man with sharp eyes, kept checking his watch like he was in a hurry. "Lot 47, Mark called out, his voice loud over the yard. 3 registered quarter horses selling together. Bloodlines go back to famous horses. Great for breeding." Sarah almost laughed at the description. It was technically true, but it didn't match the sad reality of 3 starving horses who might not live another week. The bidding started at $500 for all 3 horses, a very low price that would have been a joke if the horses were healthy. The real horse people didn't bid, either shocked by the horse's condition or unsure if they could handle such sick animals. "600, one of the strangers said, his voice flat. "700, Sarah answered right away, wanting everyone to know she was serious. The thin man in the suit turned to look at her with cold eyes, like he was sizing up the competition. When their eyes met, Sarah saw something that made her shiver, the look of someone who saw horses as things, not living beings. "800, he called, raising his hand. The bidding went up slowly, with Sarah matching every bid from the strangers while the locals stayed quiet. At $1,200, she saw doubt on the thin man's face. This was more than he wanted to pay for horses he probably planned to sell for meat, or worse. "1,500, Sarah called, hoping to end the bidding before it got too high for her budget. "2,000, the stranger said quickly, his voice sharper now. People in the crowd whispered. $2,000 was a lot for 3 horses in such bad shape, more than most people would pay. Sarah felt her heart sink. This was now about more than just buying horses. It was a battle between people who cared about animals and people who only cared about money. $2,200, she said, her voice steady even though she was worried about the cost. The thin man talked quietly with his friends. When he looked up, his face was hard, like this was personal now. $2,500. Sarah's mind raced. She had $3,000 in her bank account, saved for fixing up her farm. Spending it all on 3 horses who might not live was a risky choice. But looking at the horses, seeing the young gelding struggling to stand while people who didn't care about them tried to buy them, Sarah knew some things were more important than money. "3,000!" she called out, her voice clear in the quiet yard. The thin man's face changed, first surprised, then angry, then thoughtful. He was running a business, not a charity, and there was a limit to what he would pay. After a long pause, he shook his head and sat back. "Going once at 3,000, Mark said, raising his gavel. "Going twice." "I'll take them all," Sarah said loudly, standing up so everyone could see her. "All 3 horses, and I want to take them right away." The gavel came down with a loud bang. In the silence, Sarah heard someone whisper what everyone was thinking. She just spent all her money on 3 dying horses. Getting the horses into her trailer was almost as hard as winning the auction. The stallion was weak, but still proud enough to fight being led. The mare followed quietly, too tired to resist, while the young gelding needed help from 2 men just to stay on his feet. Dr. Emily Carter, the vet Sarah had called while finishing the paperwork, arrived just as they finished loading. She was a small woman in her 40s, with gentle hands and a no-nonsense attitude. She had been a horse vet for 20 years and had seen every kind of neglect. "How bad is it?" Sarah asked as Dr. Carter climbed into the trailer to check the horses. "Bad enough that we're racing against time," Emily said, her voice calm but with anger underneath. "The gelding is in crisis, very dehydrated, starving, and his organs are starting to fail. The mare isn't much better, and the stallion is surviving on willpower alone. Can they be saved? Maybe, but it will take a lot of care, big vet bills, and some luck. Are you ready for that?" Sarah looked at the 3 horses in her trailer. They had gone from champions to almost dead in just 6 months. The cost was scary. She had already spent all her savings, and the vet bills would be thousands more. "Whatever it takes," she said softly. The drive back to Maple Hollow was quiet and tense, with Sarah checking her mirrors to watch the horses. Dr. Carter followed in her own truck, ready to help if one of the horses collapsed. Sarah's farm was 160 acres of rolling grass, small for Texas, but just right for her. She had inherited it from her grandfather and spent 15 years making it a good place for training horses. 3 big paddocks surrounded a nice barn with automatic water and other things most horses never had. "We'll start with the gelding," Dr. Carter said, as they unloaded the horses into stalls Sarah had set up with soft bedding and easy food and water. He was the worst off. The young horse could barely stand, even with help. He was breathing fast, his gums were pale, and his eyes looked empty from hunger and neglect. "What's his name?" Sarah asked, realizing she knew nothing about these horses except their bloodlines. Dr. Carter checked the little paperwork that came with the sale. "He's registered as Pinebrook's Last Hope. The mare is Autumn Star, and the stallion is Thunder's Legacy." "Last Hope," Sarah whispered, petting the gelding's neck as Dr. Carter got 4 fluids ready. That's either a sign or a sad joke. They worked all night, giving the horses fluids, medicine, and small meals to help them recover slowly. By morning, Last Hope was a little better. He was breathing more normally and had drunk some water. Autumn Star had eaten a bit of hay, her first food in days, and Thunder's Legacy was standing more alert than at the auction. "They might make it," Dr. Carter said, tired after 12 hours of work, "but they're not safe yet. The next few days will tell." News of Sarah's big auction spread fast in Maple Hollow. Some neighbors praised her kindness, while others thought she was foolish to spend so much on sick horses. But it was the surprise visitors who really tested her. Brian Pinebrook showed up on the 3rd day, driving a rental car and wearing expensive clothes that showed he wasn't used to farm work. Sarah found him outside the barn, looking at the 3 horses in their recovery stalls with a strange look on his face. "You're the woman who bought my uncle's horses." "I am. Sarah Miller." She held out her hand, but he didn't shake it. "I want to make you an offer. I'll give you back what you paid, plus another 1,000 for your trouble. You can keep what you spend on the vet." Sarah looked at him, trying to figure out why he would drive 3 hours to buy back horses he wanted to get rid of. "Why?" "Because I learned some things about the other bidders at the auction. Things that make me wish I'd done things differently." "What kind of things?" Brian shifted, his city shoes slipping on the barn floor. "The men you outbid weren't planning to use these horses for riding or breeding. They wanted them for other reasons." The meaning hung in the air. Sarah had guessed as much, but hearing it made her angry and sick. "So now you want to do the right thing?" "I want to fix a mistake. These horses meant something to my uncle. I didn't get that before, but I'm trying to now." Sarah looked at the 3 horses, all much better after just 3 days of care. Last Hope was standing on his own. Autumn Star was interested in her surroundings, and Thunder's Legacy was starting to look like a champion again. "They're not for sale," she said quietly. "Ms. Miller, please be reasonable. You paid more than these horses are worth. I'm offering you a profit and the chance to know you saved them. Their condition is temporary. Their bloodlines are forever. And what they mean to me isn't about money." Brian's business face slipped, showing frustration and maybe guilt. "I'm trying to make up for a family mistake. Don't make this harder." "The problem started when you saw these horses as just things to sell. I'm not selling them back to someone who thinks that way." After Brian left, Sarah wondered if she had made the right choice. The money would have fixed her savings and paid the vet bills. From a practical view, it was the smart thing to do. But when she saw Last Hope, who now greeted her with a soft nicker, she knew she had done the right thing. Some relationships can't be measured in money. 3 months later, the change was amazing. Last Hope had become a beautiful young horse, his coat shiny and his eyes bright. Autumn Star was strong and pretty again, and Thunder's Legacy had the proud look of a top breeding horse. Dr. Carter came for a final checkup, amazed at how well the horses had recovered. "It's incredible," she said, watching Last Hope play in the paddock. "I've seen horses get better from neglect, but never this much." "They're survivors," Sarah said, scratching Autumn Star's neck as the mare leaned against her. "They just needed someone to care." The vet bills had been huge, almost $8,000 for medicine and care. Sarah had to take out a loan on her farm, making her budget even tighter. But watching the 3 horses run in the morning sun, she didn't regret it. A letter from the Quarter Horse Association brought surprising news. Mr. Pinebrook's careful records showed that all 3 horses had rare and valuable bloodlines. Thunder's Legacy came from champions on both sides. Autumn Star's family had produced world champions. Last Hope, even though he was young, had genes that serious breeders would pay a lot for. "You could sell them for 10 times what you paid," her neighbor Mr. Harris said, looking at the papers. "These aren't just good horses. They're gold mines." Sarah folded the papers, finally understanding why Mr. Pinebrook was so respected. "These horses are the result of years of careful breeding, keeping alive the best of the breed." "They're not for sale," she said, repeating what she had told Brian Pinebrook months before. A year later, Sarah stood in the same auction yard where she first saw the 3 horses. But this time, she was selling not horses, but their babies. Autumn Star had a beautiful colt sired by Thunder's Legacy, a mix of bloodlines that brought horse lovers from all over to see. The bidding for the young horse was so high it shocked even the experts, and the sale paid off Sarah's loan and gave her money to keep breeding good horses. Last Hope had become exactly what his bloodlines promised, a smart, athletic horse perfect for competitions. Several trainers wanted to buy him, but Sarah kept him as the start of her own training program. Ms. Miller, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts as she watched the crowd. She turned to see Brian Pinebrook, now looking comfortable in ranch clothes, his face tanned and his handshake strong from working with horses. "Mr. Pinebrook, what brings you back?" "I bought a small place about 50 miles from here. Nothing fancy, just enough land for a few horses and to learn what my uncle tried to teach me." Sarah saw real change in him, someone who once saw horses as just things. "Learning anything?" "Every day. Mostly that I had no idea what I was giving up when I sold Uncle Walter's farm." He watched Last Hope in the warm-up ring. "I heard about Autumn Star's colt, about the prices your horses are getting. I also heard you turned down big offers to sell them. Some things aren't for sale." "That's what Uncle Walter used to say. I thought it was just being sentimental, but now I get it." They stood quietly, watching the auction. Finally, Brian spoke again. "I want to say sorry for how I handled the estate sale. I was thinking like a businessman, not a horseman, and it almost cost 3 great horses their lives. They survived. That's what matters. They survived because someone was willing to pay more than they were worth to save them from people who would have hurt them. I'll never forget that." As Brian walked away, Sarah thought about her journey. A year ago, she made a choice that strained her money and tested her practical side. Now, she owned 3 horses whose babies were worth a lot and whose bloodlines would help the breed for years. But more importantly, she learned the difference between price and value, between owning animals and caring for them, between seeing horses as property and seeing them as partners. 5 years after the auction, Sarah's farm was well known among horse people. The Autumn Star and Thunder's legacy bloodlines were winning prizes all over the Southwest. The old Pinebrook farm had been sold and turned into a neighborhood with names like Quarter Horse Lane and Champion Circle, just reminders of what used to be. But the real legacy lived on in the horses at Sarah's farm, in the bloodlines she saved, and in the lesson that some responsibilities are more than just ownership. Brian Pinebrook became a regular visitor, bringing his own horses for breeding and advice. He had changed from a city businessman to a true horseman. He found what his uncle wanted to leave him, not just land and animals, but a connection to something bigger. Sarah often thought about the moment at the auction when she said, "I'll take them all." It seemed like an emotional choice, made out of anger and care, not planning. But now she knew it was the smartest thing she could have done. Some investments pay in money, others in meaning. The 3 starving horses she saved that autumn day gave her both, creating a legacy that would last long after she was gone, and making sure the best of what people and horses can do together would continue for generations. In the end, that was worth more than any price. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It helps us share these amazing horse stories with other horse lovers and animal fans everywhere. Got a horse story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you, and your story might inspire our next video. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest horse adventures. We're posting new stories all the time, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Until next time, keep riding toward your dreams, and remember, every horse has a story worth telling.